every business must capture some percentage of the value that they create in the form of revenue. Okay,
you mean they must keep some money?
They must keep some money.
Okay.
Okay, so, and this is a concept called value capture. So let's go back in the value creation section. We talked about, let's say you build a piece of software that is able to help another company create $10 million of revenue in a year. The business survives by capturing some amount of the value that it creates in the form of sales. Okay. So if the business, is creating $10 million worth of value, the price of the product ends up being some fraction, some percentage of the value that's created. So, that business could probably charge at least $1 million a year for its software.
Yeah.
And then it's capturing 10% of the value that it's creating for that company.
Cool.
Okay. And value capture is really important because every business has to do it.
Right.
Okay. In order to survive, you have to make sales.
Right.
In order to make sales, you have to provide some value.
Right.
And so value capture is the percentage of the value that you're creating or that you capture in the form of sales. Okay. The more value you can create, the more value you can capture.
Got it.
Okay. So every business must capture some value.
Right.
The thing is, you can't capture too much.
Because then it doesn't feel like a good deal to the purchaser.
Exactly. Yeah. Okay, so you couldn't, for example, capture $9.5 million from increasing the business of a company $10 million because then you're capturing most of the value you're creating. It's not worth it to work with you.
Makes sense.
Okay, so as a general rule, you want to capture somewhere in the range of 10-ish%, probably plus or minus, of the value you create. Okay.
Interesting.
If you're creating a ton of value and you're only capturing a very small portion of that, then it's worth it for other people to do business with you. It's a really good deal. They're getting 10 or 100 times the value of working with you.
Now that number, is that something that you found in your studies or have you...
General rule of thumb in terms of where to start capturing.
I guess that could also help with how you figure out how to price something.
Yeah, it can.
Gives you a baseline.
Yeah, and it's a little bit difficult to talk about because it's extremely variable by market.
Right.
I mean, sometimes you can capture, half of the value that you create. It just really depends on the type of value that you're creating and how you actually go about pricing for it. But the more value you create, the better. The more value you capture for yourself, the better.
As long as they still feel like they're getting a lot of value.
Yes, exactly. As long as the other party feels like they're getting more than they're spending, which is a precondition of them ever buying from you in the first place. Okay. Now, the amount of profit that you get is what's called your profit margin.
Right.
Okay. So the more you can capture and the less that you can spend in order to capture that amount, that's what sets your margin. Okay, so when you were in the bridal business, margins were, how did you figure that out?
Well, when a dress came in, it was priced between 2.2 and 2.5 times higher than we paid for it, depending on the designer.
Right. And so you were able to make at least 50 to 100% on every dress that you bought or dress that you sold, sometimes even higher, depending on the designer.
Well, and then you have to take out for like lights and commission and rent and all that.
Yes. So, it's typically, you're not going to be able to make 100% margin because then you're never going to be able to pay nothing. Well, I guess in some cases you may be if it's like...
But then there's sweat equity. I guess, is a different thing.
So, it's basically how much are you charging? How much are you spending? How much value are you creating? And how much of that are you capturing is what sets your profit margin. Okay. And the general rule of profit margin is the higher the margin, the better. So the closer your margin is to 100%, the better the business opportunity it is. And so, it's the other thing too, and this is a little bit of a tangent, but it's important. People value the things that give them the most value.
Right.
People also value the things that they pay the most for. This is a psychological tendency called the endowment effect. That, it's part of the reason that large consultancies like Bain and McKinsey can charge millions of dollars for consulting services because it makes the CEO feel important that they're spending $1 million on a McKinsey project. So there are some psychological elements to pricing and profit and all of these things that we'll talk about when we get to the human nature section. But value capture, general rule of thumb, every business does it.
Right.
It's better to provide a multiple of the value that you're capturing. The more that you can capture and the less that you can spend, the higher your profit margin.
Great.